Amen. The other day, once I brought up something that Stephen had sent in to Theodore and myself, primarily to Theodore, about the prophecy of Revelation 9, the 150 years followed by the 391 years and 15 days. And we've been dealing with taking these 391s and the concept of possibly laying them up on top of one another, line up on line, and therefore one of them is 391 years and 15 days, and there's other ones that instead of being 15 days, it's 6 months, half a year, however it might be expressed. So Stephen in Ireland began to think about what happens if you do that, and I pointed out that if you just take 1840, this is one of his initial thoughts, and you have 6 months, 6 times 30 is 180. If you treat it as a year-day principle and add 180 years to 1840, you come to 220. Okay, so we talked about that briefly. We didn't make a big point about it, but he and Theodore have been fine-tuning that, and Theodore now has evidence. 2020, Theodore now has evidence that on July 31st, 2020, when the elders escaped to make an inquiry from Ezekiel's passage, that's here, and that Islam is going to strike the United States here on July 18th, 2020. Okay, so we're going to let him deal with that.
What was the verse? Ezekiel?
I don't know off the top of my head. He'll deal with that probably tomorrow morning. But when I leave, I got teaching this class, I'm going to teach till Thursday, and then I'm taking off, and I have 3 persons that are going to be substituting for me, and 2 of them are coming home from Nebraska. So I want them here when Theodore lays this out tomorrow morning. So as they follow up on my studies, they've watched it, so it's in there. They're not going to necessarily go that line. I'm going to try to, if they're willing, they don't know that I'm going to ask this, I'm going to try to ask these 3 persons to carry on dealing with the connections between the presidents and the revolutions that Hess opened up, and take that a little bit further down the road. But I don't want them not to see Theodore put this in play. So the logic of this is, a part of the logic of this is that as of today, we're saying, in theory, that in July 18th, 2020, Islam is going to strike the United States one more time. And therefore, when that happens, then the people that have been kind of tacitly watching what this movement is proclaiming are going to wake up to the fact that, hey, the methodology that they've been using prophetically works. When Theodore was doing Ezekiel, if you remember, these elders escape, and that was connected with, not strongly, but there's a connection there with the word escape, that Edom, Moab, and Ammon escape out of the hand of the papacy. So these elders that escape might be referring to the Nethinims, Edom, Moab, and Ammon.
I don't remember them escaping.
Oh, I thought that was part of the
inquire.
Yeah, they inquire.
They come and inquire of the Lord.
Where was the escaping?
Well, there's escaping in another Ezekiel one.
Okay,
the
what was?
That was the escapee who comes and tells of the destruction.
Okay, there's an escapee in the story.
But in this one, it just says that certain of the elders of Israel came to inquire of the Lord and sat before me. So that's an inquiry.
Okay, inquiry. And I'm not putting any dogmatic. I'm giving you a brief overview why I'm not going to deal with this morning. So, but still the logic is there, whether it's just an inquiry and it's not those that escape. That there's people that are going to come here and have an inquiry, and the basic logic would be, well, they're going to ask questions. It's how did you get it right in advance? Okay, they're going to begin waking up to this methodology being correct. Whoever that is, okay, whoever that is, and that's my issue that I'm raising here. We're understanding that probation closes for the priest at November 9, 2019. So is this prediction that we're making now what is going to be the thing that draws in the Levites, or is it the thing that draws in the Nethinims, or both? Okay, or are we mistaking the assumption that these elders that are come to inquire here are either of those? Okay, so but in any case, I'm going to put some things in on the board this morning before we get into the notes. The notes I'm using says conclusion, but in the CAM meeting I had notes that said conclusion, and it started with Joseph Bates' presentation on Zechariah 13, but when I came into this class to continue on in this, I cut that out because I had presented it. So the notes I will be using, it says a chosen generation conclusion, and it starts with 7 and 1. And if you don't have a set of these, raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, we need 6 sets. And I'm not going to start into these notes right away, so we got time to print them so everyone can have them once we do start. But what I intend to do here, and this will be like, it'll be similar to what I just did. I was remembering the story about the escapee coming to tell Ezekiel that Jerusalem was destroyed, and I mixed it up with those that came to inquire of Ezekiel. So as I go through this next presentation, there's some things I haven't looked at for months or even years, so I'll be open to any correction along the way.
Yeah. And just a note that between November 9th, 2019 and July 18th, 2020 is 252 days. So it's 1/10 of a 25/20. That was found out yesterday at church.
Yeah, I'm going to let you do all of that. I'm not saying there isn't a bunch of strong evidence for this. My point is that what we're understanding about November 9th and 252 days to July 18th, and the implications July 18th, Islam strikes the United States again. Based upon what we've understood in the past, I'd say that has to be the midnight cry in the big picture. Not the midnight cry for the priests. But the reason that I'm saying that,
After the Sunday law?
before the Sunday law. When we begin to understand Islam, and this is the part now, I'm doing this on purpose. I'm going to go through some things that we have looked at over the past 2 or 3 years and remind us of them, because now there are dates involved. We're going to have to grapple with where the waymarks that are established by these dates fit in. And some of these things I'll say they were left unresolved because we were moving fast and we didn't have enough information base actually probably to put them together. But I'll get to my point about Islam in a second, about why I said this would be probably based on the past information would be the midnight cry. But Ezra 7:9, first day of the first month, 9/11. Then we'd see the 120 days that bring us to the midnight cry. And then over here, the Sunday law. That's the way we used to teach it. I still don't know why that's a problem. It'll be very difficult for me to change that. Because it's hard to teach an old dog new tricks, okay? But based upon Ezra 7:9 here, Ezra gets to Jerusalem on the first day of the 5th month. So to me, I want you to see that one of the real important points here is that Jerusalem is the midnight cry on Ezra 7:9, because Jerusalem becomes, to me, a really important point of reference. And for some time now, I've been emphasizing, for those that will receive it, that when you get to this waymark, you got 2 Jerusalems you got to look at. You got the Jerusalem that is the Seventh-day Adventist Church coming to its conclusion, and the Jerusalem that is Ephesus, that is the church triumphant, right here at the same point in time. One's going down, one's coming up. that being said, we know that Jerusalem is fully lifted up as an ensign over here at this waymark, the Sunday law, and that the Seventh-day Adventist Church comes to its full and complete conclusion right here. Okay, but in any case, this is Jerusalem. So when we began to have these lines opened up to us by the Lion of the tribe of Judah, one of them was Numbers 22. And in Numbers 22, you have Balaam, who's a false prophet, riding an ass who's a false prophet. The ass is Islam, and Balaam is the United States. That's how we understood it. You have two false prophets in the story. Everyone up to speed on that, right? And here we've seen Balaam getting turned out of the way. And what we understood by that was Psalms 48. That the kings of the earth had gathered together because they wanted to destroy Israel, wipe her out from being a people, a nation, if you connect that with Psalms 83, but Psalms 48. But they get turned back by an east wind. They get turned out of the way. And in the story of Balaam, Balaam gets turned out of the way by this ass. So at that point, in frustration, Balaam strikes the ass. So we were seeing Islam turning them out of the way here, and the United States striking back, the United States being the false prophet Balaam, striking back against Islam, the false prophet, the ass. And then Balaam continues on, and here the ass is going to see the angel again, and he's going to crash Balaam into a wall, but it's the wall that's in the vineyards, and it's two walls. Okay, so he's between two walls in the vineyards. And I never heard anyone resolve fully what vineyards was. Maybe someone came with some very clear thus saith the Lord's, but to me vineyards, Judah, God's people are his vineyard, okay? But it's vineyards in the plural that are in this narrative here where the ass is going to crash Balaam into the wall. So there's at least an inference that you might read that he's in the transition time from the priests and the Levites, that they were both vineyards, okay? And that would be here, yes?
Vineyards produces wine, so it should be doctrine, shouldn't it?
It could be, but if you go, the story is the parable of the vineyard, and if you go into the parable of the vineyard, his people are his vineyard. So this one I wouldn't argue one way or another. This is something that was left unresolved. But the point is here where Balaam gets his foot crushed, something also we never resolved exactly what that meant. He's between the vineyards, plural, but he's between two walls. Okay, and in this time we're coming to understand that the two walls are these two waymarks. A wall and a wall, and right here the ass crushes Balaam's foot, and then Balaam strikes the ass again. So we were seeing Islam here, and then the third strike we were marking down here. And here when the ass sees the angel, this is Numbers 22, we probably should go read it to get more specific detail. But the ass falls down, and not falls down, but he at minimum bows down. And the ass is going to speak here after he gets struck a third time. And we had many references to the speaking that put this at the Sunday law. Okay, you got Zechariah speaking after he's been numb through Elizabeth's pregnancy. You got the United States speaking as a dragon. So when the ass speaks here in response to Balaam striking him for the third time, we put that there. But he fell down here, and this is the end of the United States. This is the end of the sixth kingdom of Bible prophecy. So you can see this falling, marking the fall of the sixth kingdom, the beginning of the seventh kingdom. So when we're looking here at what's represented by the United States being struck on July 18th, 2020. That's after November 9th, 2019. And as Theodore already pointed out, that's 252 days in between the two. And 252 is 1/10 of the 2520. And Theodore can show you the 252s going through history repeatedly, and they're marked. They're marked. They're not just a casual, I'm going to cut this history here. They're marked. 252 is definitely a symbol of the 2520, just as, in fact, let's say it this way, the 252 is 10% of the 2520, and we've already come to accept the premise that the 126 is 10% of the 1260, but that premise is actually false. The 126 is more accurately 20% of the 2520. The 2520 is the primary point of reference. So when we see 252, it's 10% of the 2520. And 1260 is 20% of the 2520. Pardon? 5%. Okay, I went the wrong way.
Yeah.
Thank you. Anyway, you get my point, right? So the fact that we've already come to recognize November 9th, 2019, and now the calendars, if I can say it that way, are identifying July 18th, 252 days later, that Islam is going to strike the United States. And the reason that we're drawing the conclusion that Islam is going to strike the United States is this is derived from using the prophecy of Revelation 9, which is about Islam. Okay, the fifth, the sixth trumpet. So my point is this. Then we have the prophetic mandate to figure out, is this July 18th, 2020? Big picture, midnight cry. We're saying 2018 is midnight cry for the priests. But midnight cry in this picture, this is 2019's over here. You follow me? Okay, because there came a point in time as the Lion of the tribe of Judah opened up these things that we began to recognize a midnight. And this midnight now is what we're identifying as November 9th, 2019. Therefore, if Islam is going to strike on July 18th, 2020, if I was forced to say, well, what does that mean? And I had to apply it without any opportunity to really dig into it, I'd say that was here. Based upon past history. And that's what past studies that I'm not arguing, were unfinished.
Well, where would Penium be?
That's my point. Where would Penium be? Where is Concord, Lexington, and Boston? Okay, that's my point, is that I'm trying to just put some basics in because I think we have the responsibility to sort these things out.
Okay, so I understand what you're doing because this is how we used to do things. But we would then have to say that Sunday law, that's the Sunday law on the big line, correct? But then that means this midnight cry is for Adventism. This line here is for Adventism because Sunday law is the close of probation for Adventism in its complete way, right? Because that's the final test for Adventists. I don't know if you...
Okay.
How does that fit with the
Okay.
earlier?
Well, the priest is a smaller line earlier, so... But yeah, so instead of Sunday law, I just put close of probation, and then that
Okay.
would be consistent with what we teach. But we were saying that the Sunday law is a close of probation, but as a symbol it isn't. It just happens to be that the close of probation completely for Seventh-day Adventists is the Sunday law in a sort of simplified way.
And the point is, what's your point?
Well, the point is when we say that this is the Sunday law on the big line, That is the Sunday law on the big line, but that big line is a bigger line than, it doesn't end with the Sunday law. It ends with the second coming, right?
Right.
So just to clarify it.
To clarify what?
Which line that is, what waymark it is. Even though we're calling it the Sunday law, within the line, it's actually a close of probation. Right, for Adventism. We call it the Sunday law, but technically...
Well, we call it the Sunday law because from the very beginning, we've identified that it is a close of probation.
Yes, yeah.
We've always said, we being myself primarily, that this Sunday law is marked by the definition of when you are forced to observe Sunday and persecuted for keeping Sabbath. This is the Sunday law, and at that point, your probation closes. And the only one that's held accountable to that light at that point in time are people that are Sabbath keepers.
Yeah.
Okay, so
But just not make it confusing, just put close of probation above the Sunday law, and that would make...
no, thank you.
Okay.
I disagree with some of the ideas that are going around that you make it clearer by adding all kinds of pieces of information up there. This has been in the public record
Oh, I know.
for a long time, and this is where I started, was Ezra 7:9, first day of the first month. I was just telling you how it got laid out. He leaves Babylon, he gets to Jerusalem on the first day of the 5th month, and we came to understand that 70 days later the decree is being put in force, and that decree is typifying October 22nd, 1844, and October 22nd, 1844 was followed by a great disappointment, and that disappointment was typified by the disciples being disappointed after the cross. So all of that went into the identification that the Sunday law is what October 22nd, the cross, and the appointed time of the vision is pointing to. The Sunday law in the United States. And the United States, the glorious land of Daniel 11:40-45, is one of the primary subjects. So to be identifying the Sunday law in the United States as the Sunday law in the United States is not a problem, even if from my mindset, even if other people are, not just you, other teachers are struggling with it. If you can't hold the concept that this is 9/11, in between there's the midnight cry and the Sunday law, then you need to go back to the beginnings and get that concept in your head.
Yeah, but this is for Seventh-day Adventists. Because this isn't the big line of the world. The big line of the world ends with the close of probation. For the world. Yeah.
And the point is,
it's just a matter of labeling. The labeling helped clarify some things that we were having, confusing the lines. We were confusing the lines at times, and the labeling, we just refined it a bit. But that's...
okay, I'm sensitive because when we started this school, I've watched people come in to this school and refuse to accept the established labels, and they end up going off in darkness. And we at this school watch them come in and begin to relabel and redefine labels that were in place. So my argument is that part of the confusion is the relabeling. I think that you could hold to calling this the Sunday law and just make sure that you're defining that this is a Sunday law in the United States where probation closes for Seventh-day Adventists, and you wouldn't have to jump through all those hoops. And I'm not doing the big line, little line at this point. I'm trying to walk us back through some of the concepts we began to understand about Islam, so that when you do your line tomorrow, we have that in our head, and we can begin grappling with that.
It's just, this is what Parminder did, and for me it clarified it, made it way simpler for me, but maybe for other people it's not.
And every time I heard Parminder do something like that challenged something that I thought,
yeah,
I would go up to him and I'd say, are you saying what I taught right here was wrong? And he'll say, no, it wasn't wrong.
No, it's not wrong.
Okay, so it just depends on the context on what you're teaching it, and the context that I'm teaching here today, I think this works.
Yeah, well, yeah, there's no doubt it works.
Okay.
Yeah, that's not a problem. I'm not saying it doesn't work.
All right, so the one point I want you to get in your mind, if you will, is that we're understanding that July 18th, 2020, Islam is going to strike the United States again. And if what we understood initially about Balaam's story, that it was at this way mark, and at this way mark, okay, if that's what we understood, and what we understood that the first strike was here, there's 2 more strikes coming, and therefore we need to determine if July 18th, 2020 is this one or someone or another strike we haven't recognized before. Okay, so I want to, I'm re-putting that in your mind if you haven't visited Balaam for a long time, but maybe we had some misconceptions about Balaam. Maybe I'm even open to that there's some changing to be done.
From what I believe George was showing this, because this has been opened up recently, it would be the first strike, the midnight cry strike.
Yeah, and I'm not trying to solve that today. I have just some concepts I want to put in place. Yeah, I don't mind if you throw that out there, but I'm not expecting to. I don't know if we even want to try to solve that until Theodore lays it out for us one time, where we can see his logic for upholding July 18th, 2020, and thereafter July 31st, 2020. So. Next point, maybe there's some things that we need to rethink about these 3 strikes of Islam. Maybe not. But also, and this is one that it'd be nice to go back and look at the notes, but I didn't do. But we put the first 4 trumpets arriving here in 1989. And then the 5th trumpet here, and the 6th trumpet here. And what I mean by that is, now forget, we didn't spend much time with the first 4 trumpets. We did go through them and get their characteristics nailed down, but I'm not remembering those so much off the top of my head. But the 150-year prophecy of the 5th trumpet, we put in here. And we had a second witness for it, with Elizabeth being pregnant and in hiding for 5 months. So when we got to here, we were at July 27th, 1449. And we struggled with that for a while. I remember that part. And we finally came up with the conclusion that this is from 1449 to 1453. That being that the 391-year, 15-day time prophecy, that the beginning is going to illustrate the end, and at the end of that 391-year, 15-day time prophecy, you're at October 22nd, 1844, sort of. But you're also at August 11th, 1840, where the time prophecy itself ends, but the 6th trumpet, where that time prophecy is found, doesn't end until October 22nd, 1844. So you had 4 years at the end of the 6th trumpet, and the argument is that you're going to illustrate the end from the beginning, so you're going to have 4 years at the beginning, and these 4 years were they fit, but they cause some blank areas. Or I don't know if blank area is the right way to say it, but I'll tell you what I mean. And when it's all said and done, we're saying this way mark here that's 1449 is midnight, right? Everyone with me? And that this history here from this way mark to this way mark is 449 to 453, right? Because what happens in 1453? The wall of Constantinople is taken down. So you've got evidence 1453 lines up with this waymark, but you got a problem. What's the problem? Nobody's maybe call it a problem. It's a problem in my mind. What's the problem? Pardon me?
4 years.
Well, I don't know if that's a problem. The problem is that in the middle of these 4 years, 1451, Muhammad II decides he wants to conquer Constantinople, and history records when he decides he wants to do that. When does he want to do that? At midnight. Okay, so now you're getting confronted with, is midnight a point in time or is it a period of time? If you can buy that it's a period of time, then you don't have a problem putting Muhammad right in the middle of this history, waking up at midnight. But we got to that point, and I don't know that we ever finalized that. But you see the thing that I'm saying is that this history begins at midnight at one level, but it's in the middle of these 4 years that Muhammad too wakes up at midnight and tells his vice president or whatever he was, Vizier, that he wants to conquer Constantinople, which he does. And how do they do it?
Some kind of new weapon.
Yeah, a new weapon. From who? From where? Pardon me? Was it from Germany? I don't know. Not the weapon. I'm talking about the weapon maker. There's a weapon maker that he's the best cannon maker in the world, and Rome's losing the war, and he goes to the Roman Empire and said, let me build you a cannon to hold off the Islamic hordes. And they're saying, we ain't got the money anymore, we're about bankrupt, and he's starving to death, so he goes to Islam and says, hey, I need some money, can I make you a cannon? So that's part of that story. So we're beginning to see in here, weapons are part of this history, and maybe, we're starting to speculate that, oh, well, that means that Islam's going to get a hold of some nuclear suitcase bombs from the Soviet Union. You're starting to see a weapon builder from an outside source getting connected with Islam. And I'm not suggesting that, but that's where your mind's going in this history. Mm-hmm. And then we have to come to grips with, where do we place 1840 to 1844? Do we put the 391 years across here of this prophecy, or do we keep it in here and identify this as 1840, August 11th, 1840, to October 22nd, 1844? And this is what we ultimately settled on, if I remember right. And there was reasons for doing it. Okay, because October 22nd, 1844 typifies the Sunday law. Okay, and this history from the midnight cry to the October 22nd, 1844 is a glorious manifestation of the power of God. Is not the midnight cry to here going to be a glorious manifestation of the power of God? So that's where we were at. But here in the recent weeks, just in the recent weeks, we've come to understand that the time prophecy that is associated with the beginning history here, the 391 years and 15 days, that this is a prophetic symbol that has at least 7 witnesses in the scriptures, maybe more. It's one of those things that is opening up. So now, I think we'll have to grapple with, is there a 391 point something? The weight of evidence would be 0.5, even though this particular prophecy was 15 days.
You remember that there's 2 periods of 150 years, or 2 periods of 5 months. And there's this 126 years, and then 391 years to the next period of 150, between the 250. So there's 126 and a 391, dividing the 2 periods of 150 years. I could lay it out tomorrow just simply.
Okay, what he's saying, I don't know how this is going to help us at this point. But in this history of the 5th trumpet, a long time ago, Theodore identified 202 150-year periods. The one we identify is the prophecy that we call the first woe. The military activity of the trumpets is what we call the woes. The 5th trumpet begins with Muhammad, it goes all the way to 1449, but there's the military activity of Islam is this 150-year period. But Theodore found it, but the 5th trumpet is much longer than 150 years, and he's found in that history that there's another 150-year period that is specifically marked in history And now he's telling us there's 126 years between the 250-year
There's
periods.
126 and then a 391 that connects the two. So there's 126 plus 391 that connects the two periods of 150 years.
Connects them or
Connects-
spans them?
Spans, so it goes,
150 on this end and
when the 150 ends, there's 126
Okay.
years, there's another event, and then there's 391 years, and then the 150 years.
Bookends.
Okay, so
So, yeah, 150 years book.
this history here is more complex than you would think at face value, and he recognized that. I mean, he showed that to me a couple of years ago at least. So, when it comes to the 391 year and a half, we've taken time, I know I have, to show that in this history that there's an hour, a prophetic day, a prophetic year, and a prophetic month. And you can find them. You can find passages in the scripture that are talking about a month and show that month is this history. Or talking about an hour. You can show that. So we've been grappling with the fact that in this history you have the time prophecy of 391 years and 15 days. But that was before we actually understood that there was really going to be a time element attached to those. So we've never went back in, that I know of, into this and grappled with how the 391 year, 15 day or half year prophecy would impact our understanding. Okay. With the wall of Kai, I'm saying that until better light comes in, as I remember it, where we stood is at midnight was 1449, July 27, 1449. The midnight cry was 1453, but the midnight cry was also 1840, and this August 11th, 1840, if you want the day, month. And this is October 22nd, 1844. So that's where that was at, but now we're getting confronted with the element of time, so there may be some fine-tuning that has to take place on that stuff. But in the meantime, when we started grappling with the walls, the two walls, what did we come to understand the two walls were? Marriage and Sabbath. And the obvious place to put them, of course, would be just like this. Why? Because this is the Sabbath. And what does Sister White call these two institutions?
Twins.
They're twins. Okay, so we began to see that this wall was associated with marriage, and this with the Sabbath, and this led us into the nation that typifies the United States, which is France. And so we began to see that the two horns of France that typified the two horns of the United States were Sodom and Egypt. So if you're going to make the case, as it opened up, that these two horns would represent the two horns of France, the two horns of the United States, which one would be Sodom? Sodom here. Egypt here. Why would you put Egypt here, Sister Karen? Because right here, the sixth kingdom of Bible prophecy is all over the glorious land in Daniel 11:41, and now the sixth kingdom of Bible prophecy is the subject, and it's Egypt. He shall stretch forth his hand, or he shall enter also into the countries, and I forget how it goes right now, the verse 42 and 43 of Daniel 11. So this is where we began to see what? Like in the Adventist church. What do we see in the Adventist church? We believe they're going to accept the Sunday law down here, those that haven't been sanctified by the truth. That's easy to show in the scriptures. Many shall be overthrown. Daniel 11 verse 41, you take the word overthrown, it's talking about Seventh-day Adventists. Okay, many Seventh-day Adventists get overthrown at the Sunday law in the United States. Just by running the word overthrown alone, you can show that. But what was going on in Adventism as we're opening these things up?
pastors, right?
Gay pastors, but that wasn't it. It was sort of. Kind close, but women's ordination. Okay, so we're starting to see that the established hierarchy of the family in the scriptures it's being corrupted within the Adventist church. They're starting to open the door for women's ordination, and we're seeing this coming in advance of this, where they're going to be overthrown at the Sunday law. So we're recognizing all these things, but now let me back you up. Where's the first Sunday law? Midnight cry. There's a Sunday law here. Why do you say that, Sister Karen?
Because it escalates.
It escalates.
More power in each one of
Where's your point of reference for upholding that? Great Controversy says, if the reader would understand how the Sunday laws are to be introduced, he but has to study the history of the early church. And then she goes into where? What history? To the first Sunday law, which was? Who? Constantine. When? And she tells the history of Constantine and the progressive development of Sunday exaltation and Sabbath desecration, and it reaches a point over here where you're at 538, the enforcement of the Sunday law by the papacy. So we were marking this way mark as 321, the first Sunday law, and this one is 538. Does everyone remember this logic?
I thought it was 331.
Is it? You thought it was 331? I thought it was 321. We're 3, 2, 1. Okay. So, what do we call this? This in this regard, all these can be connected with that. The Lord has shown me clearly that the image of the beast, this is the image test, and this is the mark test. Everyone remember all that? When we were getting to this level where we were looking at France with its two horns of Sodom and Egypt, we were comparing this horn with what horn of the United States? Protestantism. Protestantism's already been overthrown in 1844. But what were we comparing this horn with? Republic. Republic. But where was republicanism overthrown by the way we were understanding? Pardon me? 9/11, why? The Patriot Act marked it, but why were we putting the overthrow of republicanism here? Constitution is part of it, but why were we putting it here? Pardon me? You guys don't remember. Okay, I said Protestantism was overthrown in 1844. When was Protestantism overthrown? On the first day of the first month. The Protestants have fully rejected the first angel's message, have they not? First day of the first month. Right? That's when the horn of Protestantism is overthrown. Therefore, where is the horn of republicanism overthrown? The first day of the first month. It's the same place. But the first day of the first month in our history is 9/11. That's the logic that we used. If you don't remember, that's the logic. You follow the logic? Okay, but it's a progressive fall. Who's the symbol of the progressive fall? Manasseh. Right? What does the theologians say? No, Manasseh, you can't start Manasseh as the beginning of the 2520 because sure, he was taken into Babylon, but he was allowed to come back. So that's an invalid historical application. But what does Sister White call Manasseh? An earnest, which means what? A down payment. And we came to understand that Manasseh is the first of the 7 kings that represent the 7 thunders. Yes? So he's the beginning illustrating the end. What's the end? Zedekiah. What's going to happen to Zedekiah? He's going to gouge out and he's going to go into Babylon. So if Jesus illustrates the end from the beginning, did Manasseh go into Babylon? Yes. Did he come out of Babylon? Did Zedekiah come out of Babylon? Yes. Prophetically, they come out of Babylon to rebuild the temple and the city. Okay, so Manasseh is the earnest. He's the beginning of that prophecy, and he's typifying the end, which is Zedekiah, and all the characteristics are there to anyone that wants to see it. But what begins in 677 when Manasseh is carried into captivity? The 2520. So what's he typifying? The progressive fall of the glorious land. He was the king of the glorious land, and he was the symbol of a progressive fall of the glorious land. And that progressive fall is illustrated in the beginning of Adventism and the end of Adventism. And the first thing that is conquered is the Protestant horn, and it's conquered on the first day of the first month in 1844. And the second horn is conquered on the first day of the first month in 2001. Is that how you remember it? Because I'm pretty sure that's how we taught it. Okay, so over here we're acknowledging these horns. They're still players, but we're not denying that they've already been passed. They're at the very end. Okay, had the Jews sealed their faith when they crucified Christ? Yes, but it's not going to be until Stephen's stoned that Michael stands up, right? And even then, Jerusalem doesn't get destroyed for another 36 years. Is that what you said?
39 or 40.
Okay, so I think we got to come to grips with what we understand here in this history. And the reason that I took the time to go here is there came a point in time where we began to understand that the first president of the United States typified the last president of the United States. And when we went back to the first president of the United States, we've seen a relationship between the American Revolution and the French Revolution that could not be denied. It was too strong. And so we began to look at a little closer at Sodom and Egypt and France, and it never proceeded ahead. Okay, just other directions got taken. But I remember, and I'm sure that I have it somewhere in my notes, but you need to understand I have thousands and thousands of pages of notes. So to go in and do a search and find what I'm looking for is sometimes really almost impossible for me. But I remember, and I hope someone has this so they can save the labor. But there is an illustration of the beginning of the Russian Revolution and how it was typified by the beginning of the French Revolution. And I remember some of the details, but not all of them. It's unbelievable what the parallel that is there in the beginning of the French Revolution with the beginning of the Russian Revolution. We've already discussed a couple of those things, that there's always an activity of women, and the women's march upon the King of France is paralleling the women that defend the armory in the Russian Revolution, the Bread March or whatever that was called, and the taking of the Bastille. That's where they stored the weapons. There was weapons captured in the Russian Revolution. The king dies in the French Revolution. The Tsar and his family die in the Russian Revolution. So there's a connection there with the French Revolution and the Russian Revolution, but the connection with the French Revolution is also with the American Revolution. Okay, the year that the Constitution's put in place here is when the new Constitution in France was put in place, if you can call it that. It's called the Rights of Man, and that's what marks the beginning of the French Revolution. And it was a new constitution for them. So, I'm telling you this because when these students get back tomorrow, I'm going to take a few of them and I'm going to ask them I'm going to give them job assignments if they're willing to do it. And I want to pursue this connection between revolutions a little bit further, see if they can't find some stuff and lay it out. And I'm going to ask one of them to take up the little bit that we know about the presidents and tie that together, because I think that's also what will tie the revolutions together. But it's partially, it's connected with this history here. And for me, Tess's line upon lines of the revolution was excellent, but it's still incomplete. There's stuff in there that needs to be tied together. And if you don't remember it, part of the reason that we started down this road on the 391.5 is because she's saying that the Reign of Terror begins in 1789 and goes to 1794, I believe. And I'm saying not so. The Reign of Terror actually is July 27th, 1793 to July 27th, 1794, and therefore July 27th needs to be looked at. And as we begin to look at July 27th, Theodore's already been prepared to open these things up from the 391-year time prophecy. Let me put something in the public record for those people that are watching around the globe. When this began to open up, this is a totally different subject, but I want to put it in place before I forget. When we were talking about the Italian camp meeting in 2017, followed by the Italian camp meeting in 2018, there came a point in time where we identified that at 9/11 was the time in that little town that the Sabbath began, and that I finished the prayer for my sermon, I believe, or if not the sermon, but I finished it exactly at 9/11. And there's even a screenshot to prove it. And everyone there knew it. It just kind of wowed everyone. We never thought anything about it. But in our discussion, it came up that I had preached for 2 straight hours, which equated to 120 minutes. And the first time I heard that, I said, I can't imagine me actually preaching for 2 hours. And then as time passed, there was some people said, well, we were having technical problems, if you remember, so we had to stop in your sermon and we had to do some stuff. So I thought, oh, well, you know, I don't catch everything anyway. But since we've been discussing this in the public arena, because this history of 2017 is typifying the history in 2018, which is typifying the history in 2019. And we can see that now. And they're all squaring up with Samuel Snow's publications in 1844. And they're all also being governed by Ezekiel's illustration of prophecy laying on his side, and by the prophecy that's of Josiah that's in with Ezekiel, and with the prophecy of Revelation 9. So we're being wowed at that time. But people begin to call Jonathan, who recorded this stuff in Italy, and I don't really know their motivation, saying, was it really 120 minutes? I have a hunch that it was probably people that were there that weren't remembering me speaking for 120 minutes. So Jonathan went back in, and he doesn't have the raw footage anymore. He's already produced it. But he can't believe that that's the case. He says, I spoke twice on Sabbath, 2 different presentations, and one of them ends up being like 69 minutes and 163. I forget what it was when it's all cleaned up. He says there's just, if you put them together, there would be way more than that. But either one of them standing alone, even if we had some technical glitches, it wouldn't extend to 120. So I don't know where the 120 came up. We came up with it, but what was nice about it is that we also realized that this was Sabbath, and that the camp meeting had began 6 days before. So we had this number 6 here, and then 120 minutes, so we could see 126 at the beginning of this this history that was going to extend out to June 15th, which was going to tie us into the next line. But I'm here to tell any of those people that have a problem with what we were saying about 120, that you don't have to have a problem about it, because this took place on June 2nd. Is that right? I think it's June 2nd or the next year's June 9th or vice versa. But in any case, June 2nd in this history is Pentecost. And because it was Pentecost, in the testimony of the scriptures on Pentecost, there's 120 people that are there. So the 120 there is there just from the fact that this is taking place on Pentecost. So this structure is still in place, even though I don't know how anyone came up with the 120 minutes. I don't know where that came from. So I wanted to put that in the record. Let me think before I go to the notes. Okay, we're marking this as November 9th for the priest, 2019, yes? And what I'm saying is tomorrow, Theodore is going to show us how, now it slipped my mind, July 18th, 2020 is, I don't know that he has a direct thus saith the Lord that this is a strike from Islam, but I agree with him because it's based upon deriving this number from the prophecies of Revelation 9, which are about Islam, and 1840, the restraint of Islam. So all the logic is there. It's like the only choice there is that it's an Islamic strike. So when that gets put in the record, then we're going to have to try to blend in where we understand July 18th, 2020, and then July 31st, when the elders come and make an inquiry of Ezekiel. And as I was saying the other day, Ezekiel's us. This movement, the faithful people that are on this side of midnight in this movement, the ones that are still left, are the ones that are going to come get inquired by, or to, however you would say that, inquired of, on July 31st, 2020. Okay, so that's... Now, let me throw one other thing in that's a little bit... It's not frustrating for me, but I'm going to use the word frustrating so you'll get my logic. One of the things that's frustrating about this for me, but it's not, is that we're saying in advance now, on July 18th, 2020, Islam is going to strike the United States again. But because we have this other waymark of July 31st, 2020, the elders coming to inquire of this movement, whatever that might mean, it produces a logic that tells you that they're going to recognize that that movement saw in advance what was going to happen on July 18th, 2020. So, you know, the wise men from the east, they came and inquired in Jerusalem about what about this star? And in Jerusalem, they didn't know. So that was an inquiry. There's certain inquiries in the scriptures that you probably put on top of that to define what that inquiry was. And that's all well and good, but 2020 is after 2019. So the logic to me has always been that in this history, not always been, that the logic for me is that in this history here, the priests, the faithful priests, are getting lifted up as an ensign, and that they will have been identified socially or culturally as having some special light that begins to draw the Levites to themselves. Okay, so perhaps this date here is what does that. Because we're going to get ridiculed big time. It's only going to escalate the ridicule we're going to get over talking about November 9th. Maybe this is it, but there has to be something out there that was typified by Josiah Litch. Ottoman Empire is going to, the Ottoman supremacy is going to cease in August of 1840, and the whole world says this is a bunch of nonsense. And then he fine-tunes it, says no, it's August 11th, 1840. And Sister White says, the event exactly fulfilled the prediction. When it became known, multitudes were convicted of the methodology employed by William Miller, and an impetus came into the movement that heretofore could not have been. Something like that, you know the quote. I'm expecting that to take place in this history personally. So maybe this is that prediction, but maybe there's something a little bit more than simply that.
You pointed out the wise men were Islam. But the application you were describing was the wise men from the SDA church. I don't know if that matters.
Yeah, I don't know how, that's not the only inquiry in the scriptures that you can use, but I mean, I'm not trying to argue with you, but I could argue there too that in that story it's the wise men from the east, that's Islam, so they're a false prophet, so maybe this is apostate Protestantism coming to make an inquiry. But I get your point. I'm saying that when we start trying to figure out what the inquiry is, that we're going to have to go in and take up all the lines where inquiry is illustrated and bring them together.
You got Islam connected with an inquiry. That's the main point.
Yeah, but we've looked at inquiries in the past. They're just not popping into my head right now. A couple other ones popped into my head this morning when I was thinking about this presentation, but they're not popping right now. Does anyone else know of some prophetic inquiries that I'm forgetting about? The Queen of Sheba. She's going to come an inquiry of Solomon about, but we always put this over here. And we said that she is Nethinims that are coming to inquire about Solomon's great wealth and his prosperity.
Well, Sheba's the 7 times.
Sheba's, yep, the 7 times. That's why we put it there, the joining of the 2 sticks. But so we've seen an inquiry with her, wise men, anyway. Comments? Okay. I told Brother Richard something last night, and I'm gonna follow my own rule of thumb. I'm switching gears now. Okay. What I intend to show here now, and it isn't about all these characteristics. It's in this study that we're actually going to begin to look at here. I'm going to argue that Ezekiel 7:9 gives us these 3 waymarks. First day of the 1st month, first day of the 5th month, and just by inference, 10th day of the 7th month down here. Okay, so that was recognized by Millerites, it's recognized by us. But where was I going to go? Another line that we put upon that is 2 Chronicles 29 and 30. Okay? Because on the first day of the 1st month in 2 Chronicles 29, they begin to cleanse the temple and the courtyard, and it takes them how many days to cleanse the temple? 8 days. And how many days to cleanse the courtyard? So we use that to put an 8 in here and an 8 in here. And I think it was accurate. I'm not backing away from that, but I'm thinking that I believe that in order to define this 8, what it means that the temple's cleansed, then you've got to go line upon line. And that in the scriptures it's going to tell us that it's 7 where the temple gets prepared, and it's 7 where sin is removed, and it's 7 where the priests are prepared, and then on day 8 the temple begins to function as the temple and the priests begin to function as priests. So I'm saying rather than 8 simply marking this point in time as the conclusion of 8, that 8 is addressing this history right here. And in this history I'm going to show, I hope, that there is a first fruit offering, and that this 8 is addressing another first fruit offering down here. But they are 2 different first fruit offerings. One is the first fruit offering of Pentecost, which is the 2 wave loaves. And this is 2 wave loaves, right? And then I'm not so sure that the 2 wave loaves wouldn't be more accurately just put here more at a point in time, as opposed to this first fruit offering, which is not the wave loaf offering. And this first fruit offering is barley, and this is wheat. And I'd go so far to say that this first fruit offering has 2 parts, so you could say priests and Levites if you wanted to say that this is Adventism. But down here it's the priests. Okay, so using Parminder's, it's not Parminder's, but using the logic that Parminder's been employing more than anyone else here recently, I'm saying that probation closes right here at this point in time for all the priests, whether they're good priests or bad priests. But right here, probation closes for the Levites, but it is a progressive close that goes to here. And right here, probation closes for the Nethinims, but it's progressive. This is the harvest, this is the harvest. This is a progressive harvest, but with the priests, it's a singular harvest. And that the priests are represented by the barley, and they get lifted up as a first fruit offering between midnight and the midnight cry. And that the Levites are going to get lifted up here as a first fruit offering, but it's the first fruit offering that's typified by the Pentecost first fruit offering, which was 2 wave loaves that were baked with leaven, thoroughly baked. This here is simply waving the barley sheaf. Okay, you cut it down and you go wave it before the Lord. That's the barley in this history. But here, this wheat offering, you got to take that first fruit wheat, you got to take it, you've got to get the wheat free from it, you've got to grind it and turn it into flour, you got to mix it with leaven and water, and then you got to bake the leaven out of it before you have the offering. So it's talking about a process of preparing a first fruit offering, where I don't see much of a process here. And I think the distinction between barley and wheat, a point in time close of probation, a period of time close of probation, speaks to that process, as opposed to just taking the wave sheaf and lifting it up. Now, in connection with that, I'm going to try to show that in the tabernacle that Moses raised up and the temple that Solomon built, that there came a point in time where the temple or tabernacle was ready for service, and there's a manifestation of the power of God that takes place. And I'm saying that if you read closely, the effect that it has upon the worshipers is different than the next manifestation of the power of God, because in both histories, with Moses and Solomon, once the offering began, then there's also another manifestation of the power of God, and the effect upon the people then is they're going to shout with a loud cry. Whereas the effect upon the people here was just a humiliation, not a negative humiliation. They were humbled, they were awed, but there is no shout that's noted there. So what I'm saying is that this here is, in the story of Solomon, it's when the Ark of the Covenant gets brought into the temple, and there's a manifestation of the power of God that drives everyone out of the temple. And same thing when the temple, the tent sanctuary by Moses is raised. Yes?
We used to talk about the Mara and the Mare, and the Mara was where we went face down in the dust, and that was our humbling experience. So you're saying that's right before we get to 8, or is that where it would happen, is in 8?
Well, you listen to me, my sister. You're going to see that I'm not going to touch the Mare and the Mara in this presentation, because what we used to understand about that has been, I'm not ready to go back there and stand on everything that we used to teach about it. But I understand what you're saying, and yes, that's what happens to Daniel in Daniel chapter 10, is you get humbled in the dust. And so do every prophet that sees the glory of the Lord gets humbled in the dust.
Lifted up, of course, and so we know that ensign would be when we're lifted up.
I'm just not going to go there, because there's more understanding on the Mara now than we used to have. And it has to do more about the prophetic message than it has to do with the personal experience. So this here, I'm going to say is September 2018. Now, the reason I'm saying that is not, I'm not necessarily for the reason you might make that claim, and I don't have a problem if you make that claim, but the reason I'm saying September is I don't know exactly when Tess began to share here, but I think it was October, wasn't it? Yes?
It was both.
End of September.
Okay, so she qualifies. But see, I'm not looking at Tess as a singular manifestation of this message. Because at the same point in time, the understanding that we have about the calendars is going to arrive here in September. And the understanding about the presidents is going to come into light as well. And so if you're looking at some of the time thoughts that are out there about what's happening in this movement right now, if you go from 1798 to 2018, that's 220 years. Okay, and then if you go from, how does that work? From 19, I guess, 1996 to 2018, you have 22 years. 1996 being a waymark, 22 being 1/10 of the 220, if you can do that. And if you go from December of 2016, which is when the light about Russia being the king of the South is opened up in Wales, then you have 22 months till you get to September of 2018. Now, that's nice, but even if you didn't have that, what I'm saying is in September, you can see at least 3 branches that I'm under conviction contribute to bringing this message into clarity. You got the second witness to Tess's presentation, and I'm saying Tess's presentation is about the King of the North. It's the tidings of the North. And I'm saying that Theodore's material is about Islam, and it's the tidings of the East. And that second witness secures what Sister Tess is saying, but I'm under the conviction right now that the understanding of the presidents is the key that's going to weave these revolutions together and put it all into a package, and all of these 3 subjects come up in September of 2018. Okay, so that's my logic. But we can argue about this. We can have disagreements. We don't have to argue. But what I'm saying is the temple, the glory of the Lord has filled the temple. And I'm open for correction on this, but in the story of Solomon, it's when the Ark of the Covenant is brought in that happens, when the Shekinah comes into the most holy place that Solomon has built. And when that happens, I'm saying that it is identifying the final doctrinal shaking. And the final doctrinal shaking in this movement is the nature of man, the nature of Christ. The truth about that, and the truth about that can be summarized down to the atonement, when Christ becomes one with His people. Okay, combination of humanity and divinity does not sin. So I'm saying right in this very history, the final doctrinal argument has taken place. Now the Lord is doing what George Seaman's sermon was 2 Sabbaths ago. He's saying right before you get to the close of probation, before you get to the door closing on the ark, before you get to the destruction of Jerusalem, then the light about the time element is opened up. So I realize that the time element, you can say, well, that's another doctrinal shaking. I don't think so. I think this time element is a binding off. Anybody that did not have genuine confidence in the methodology that was being used by this movement, this will be their excuse, their hook to hang their doubt on, to jump ship. And those of us that do have confidence in the methodology, it may astound us that we've arrived at a place where we're actually identifying a time when we never thought we were going to do that. And we may have difficulty managing the calendar variations. But the lines that Tess laid out, that was the methodology. It's pretty hard to shake those of us that have become familiar with methodology. And I'm actually amazed, personally, that as I've watched this message go out over the past weeks, when I seen what was happening and I realized the implications of her teaching, I personally thought, wow, our mailing list is going to go from this amount way down to this amount. And it doesn't seem like it's getting challenged at all. The people that are on that mailing list, they're praising the Lord. So my point is that I think the Lord had already brought us to a point for a doctrinal parting of the ways, and that this is a binding off issue more than a doctrinal issue, even though I'm not denying that it's doctrine. So here I'm going to say that we could begin to function in this period of 8 as priests and as an offering, and Christ was the offering and he was the priest. So we got a dual role that we're going to do if we're faithful. And when Christ was lifted up here as a first fruit offering on the cross, he's typifying what will go on in this history. And the reason, for me, everyone has their own reasons, but for me, the reason that I clicked so quickly on Theodore's material here is because he's been sharing this stuff publicly for a while, and in the meantime sometimes he would share this with me privately, and sometimes on emails, but I mean sometimes we had meetings together, just him and I, where he was sharing this stuff. It doesn't sink in too well for me. But there reached a point not so long ago, half a year ago or whatever, where I realized what he was saying about Samuel Snow's letters. That's what tied this together for me, because I realized now I can make an argument that there's a chiasm in Samuel Snow's history that is, the center of it is Passover in Samuel Snow's history, and Passover has its own chiasm in the midst of the week, so you have a double chiasm there. And it marks the beginning, it marks 2014, and therefore, in the history of 2014, until you get to here, the beginning history was the cross. Therefore, I had the proof text I needed, that if the beginning history upon 2 witnesses was Passover, it was the cross. Therefore, I can put the cross in here because Jesus illustrates the end from the beginning. So I saw that, and it clicked on me, and I've been using it. So when he's laying out these lines, and he finally realizes that Snow's history is paralleling these histories of the Italian camp meetings. It was already in place in my mind. But my point is 2014, you can show a cross and a beginning of a history that I'm saying concludes here at midnight. Therefore, you have the prophetic justification for putting a cross in there. And with the cross comes the chiasm of this 1 week. And where we started in this presentation today was that this period from midnight to the midnight cry is 1449 to 1453. So we've already understood that it is a point in time at one level, but it's a period of time at another level, and there's things going on in that history with Islam, but also, I'm saying, with the priests and the offering. And at this point, the temple is dedicated in the story of Moses and the story of Solomon. Then you have a prayer. And the offering service then begins, and then fire comes down out of heaven upon the offering. In both instances, this is the manifestation of divine power at the first fruit offering. And the prayer to me is one of the keys to see the number 81. Because the number 81 is midnight. Right? Lots of witnesses. I intend to look at those a little bit in this presentation when we get started into it. I hope to be done by Thursday. But one of the most important passages of 81 is Revelation 8:1. Revelation 8:1 is the opening of the seventh seal. And you'll see in the opening of the seventh seal that there's going to be fire that's cast down. I'm saying this is the fire upon the offering, upon the first fruit offering. But you'll notice that before that fire is cast down, those coals from off the altar, that there is prayer that is marked. That's Solomon's prayer, Moses' prayer. Then the fire that's associated with the casting down of the seventh seal takes place. And we've taught consistently since we began to understand it that the opening of the seals is a progressive thing, not a point in time. So I'm not denying that the seventh seal begins to get opened over in this history, but this is where the Band-Aid's fully off, and there's going to be a manifestation of power that comes down out of heaven, and that's Pentecost, right? Tongues of fire on their forehead, and that's the history that takes place between midnight and the midnight cry. That's what I intend to show, and I intend to show that over here there's still a first fruit offering, but it's a different first fruit offering. When's this first fruit offering and the feast take place? You got Passover, then what? Feast of Unleavened Bread, then first fruits. You got 3 days there. Passover, unleavened bread, first fruits. This is first fruits. What does first fruits begin? Pardon me? Feast of Weeks. What's the Feast of Weeks? How many days in the Feast of Weeks? 49. Where does the Feast of Weeks conclude? Pentecost. Is Sunday law a symbol of Pentecost or vice versa? Okay, at Pentecost, you're still in the spring feasts. You're just 49 days after the first fruit offering, but at Pentecost there's going to be another first fruit offering, but it's 2 wave loaves. So I'm saying in connection with 2 Chronicles 29 that you have an 8 here, that this gets cleansed and it's a priest, and an 8 here where the priests and Levites come together in 2 loaves of bread. So what I told Richard last night was, what I would have appreciated in his sermon is that before he started yesterday, if he would have told us an overview of where he was going, then it would have been easier for all those of us to follow along. I said, you should do that every time. And from what I understand, I told him, in your sermon, you should do it a couple more times before you get to the end to remind the people of where you're going. So what I did here this morning was follow my guidance that I gave to Richard, is that this is what I'm going to try to do over the next couple days with my notes. But tomorrow I intend to give Theodore a certain amount of time. By a certain amount of time, I mean less than an hour and a half, to cover July 18th and July 31st, 2020, because I want the people that are coming back from Nebraska to watch it happen so they have it in their memory banks. And then I'll come back in and start through these notes that we never touched. Shall we pray? Yes.
It's supposed to be 370. For those who are keeping track.
And Kathy and I were checking on all of you this morning. We were here an hour early and no one else was. We forgot to fall back, all right? Shall we pray? Heavenly Father, we thank you for the light that you are opening at this time, and we thank you for the light that you've been opening through the years. As we approach this coming crisis, we want to understand these things, and we want these truths to accomplish a work in us and for us, and also in this movement. That as individuals and as a corporate body, we can reflect the message that you've given us. We ask that the time we spend in this classroom would contribute to that development in each of us. We once again pray for traveling mercies for those people that are coming home from Nebraska, and our friends brothers and sisters around the world that are traveling and serving in various capacities and presenting this message. We thank you for all these things. In Jesus' name, amen.